Hello again. My name is Barry Keating, an economist at the University of Notre Dame. I'd like to comment on some of the comments that you have made about the value of wireless spectrum. And I'd like to draw your attention to a recent study. This recent study was commissioned by a consortium that included both Google and Comcast. The study was done by Raoul Katz. He's a PhD from MIT, much like our Professor Lanneman in the Understanding Wireless course, but he's now the Director of Business Strategy and Research at the Columbia Institute for Teleinformation. What the study did is it tried to value wireless spectrum that is unlicensed. Now, it's relatively easy, as we pointed out in this week's information, to value spectrum that has actually been purchased, or the rights to use it have been actually purchased. You'll recall that a recent spectrum auction, largely won by Dish Network here in the United States, brought in $40 billion to the United States government. What's even more interesting is this study points out, and let me quote from the study, technologies operating in unlicensed spectrum bands in the United States generated a total annual economic value of $222 billion in 2013 alone, and contributed $6.7 billion to the nation's GDP. How is unlicensed spectrum valuable? And first of all, what do we mean by unlicensed spectrum? Well, I'm talking about spectrum that's used for Wi-Fi, spectrum that's used for Zigbee, spectrum that's used for Bluetooth, near-field communications, RFID, radio frequency identification. For instance, the value of free Wi-Fi traffic offered in public sites was really rather large in the United States, but also the value of Bluetooth devices, Zigbee-enabled products, all of the values in retailing of using RFID identification, and the values largely in healthcare of using RFID identification. Again, quoting from the study, the producer surplus resulting from the adoption of tablets, many of you are probably watching this on tablets, is almost as high as residential Wi-Fi, and it was 5 times the surplus estimated recently by Milgram for the iPad. Unlicensed spectrum provides an environment for the development of new business generating revenues that would be considered as a direct contribution to GDP. Actually, wireless internet service providers have produced all sorts of things that you and I probably use. Bluetooth headsets, near-field communication payment devices like Google Pay and Apple Pay. All of those things add value to the economy by making our life easier. So one of the interesting questions to consider is what the value is of unlicensed spectrum. And will the governments of different countries leave some spectrum unlicensed and therefore promote development in these areas? Remember, Wi-Fi, a piece of unlicensed spectrum, was actually an afterthought of the United States government. It was thought to be unusable spectrum and therefore left unlicensed. That unusable spectrum has become the most valuable spectrum in the United States. $222 billion in the year 2013 alone. By the way, I'll give you a reference to this study, and you can look it up online and read the entire study, all 84 pages of it, yourself.